agency, so we develop experiences and brands that are creatively led but technology fueled. I lead our UX team, so I manage all of our user research, usability studies, information architecture, wireframing, that type of stuff. And I'd like to have a little bit of an open discussion today. So if you have a question that comes up as I'm going through my slides, feel free to shoot it through the webinar tool, and then I'll try to answer them as they come up. At Sandstorm, we've conducted over 3,000 UX interviews and usability studies, and today I'm going to share some of our insights from that research. Within that 3,000 hours, that includes research and work with associations, B2B clients, and B2C clients, including e-commerce. So we really like to sort of look across all industries and verticals to try to pull the best from each area. And I think for an association, there's a lot that transfers from a B2B or a B2C client in terms of an online experience. Conducting usability studies is really my favorite part of my job. It's just fascinating for me to watch people, use an experience or a site that's been designed for them and just see firsthand how they interpret the design and sort of where things vary from what our theories were and what we thought they would do. We always learn something, and there's always something that's a little bit of a surprise. As someone who's been building websites and software since the mid-90s, I've really heard and seen all kinds of rationale for making them more difficult to use than they need to be. All too often, the user experience is sort of dictated by the biggest voice in the room. Really, and decisions are often made by developers or stakeholders based more on assumptions about the user than actual research or understanding. A lot of experiences are designed from the organization's point of view rather than from the user's perspective. Or the other side of that is sometimes decisions are made with the best interest of the user in mind based on a user-centered approach, but somehow there's still something that's a little bit off or misses the mark. And again, the desire to sort of make decisions based on your organizational view rather than your user view still kind of seeps its way in as you're developing and designing an online experience. And this is really why testing is a good idea. No matter how well you think you know your users, you are not them. And the best way to find out if your website is easy for them to use is to involve them in the design process. So testing with actual users really means you no longer are making assumptions and subjective decisions about what you think they want or what you think they'll do, and then that biggest voice in the room doesn't necessarily need to be the only voice. A usability study doesn't take a long time. It's not a big bloated process, and we don't really need a large sample size. You really only need 5 to 6 participants to find most of the problems. In general, the way to go about a usability study is really quite simple. You decide what you want to test, you create your task scenarios that you want users to work through, and then you recruit people who use your site. For an associations, this is a little bit easier because you have a membership base and you can obviously go to that membership base to get people to do your testing. And we do our testing usually face-to-face, so one-on-one, one at a time, the tester in the room with the moderator going through the site and going through a series of tasks. We do occasionally run remote studies if we need to, either just to get the right participants, they're spread out geographically, or it's just not practical to conduct them face-to-face for other reasons. We did do a usability study once with an organization out of Bermuda, and while I would have loved to go to Bermuda to conduct that study, it just wasn't feasible for cost reasons and just other logistical reasons. So we did remote studies via screen share, and it worked out well. During the study, we're interacting with the participants one-on-one. We're asking them to perform tasks on your website, and then we see firsthand how they experience things. Another aside to that is, working with associations, we've had a lot of success conducting usability studies during annual meetings because your membership base is already gathered in one place and they're easy to get a half hour, an hour of their time to have them work through a study. So again, when you're conducting a usability study, what you're seeing is how people work. There's no interpretation, there's no assumptions. They either understand something or they don't, and then they can help articulate what it is that they don't understand, or they can often articulate what it is they don't understand. So over 1 or 2 days, you can observe 5 to 6 participants, you can identify the biggest issues, and then you can agree as a team how to make changes to improve the site. And again, including everyone on your team in this process makes it a lot easier to prioritize fixes and then come up with innovative solutions. Not too long ago, we did a 2-day study with an organization. It was more of an e-commerce model, but we involved their dev team in the process. And so we actually had 1 day of testing, and their dev team was there, and then their dev team was making fixes and updates after the study. So when we did the test the next day, we were able to confirm and validate some of the changes we made. So for those of you who have not seen a usability study before, here are a few screenshots of studies on mobile, desktop, and a wireframe prototype. So the select your coverage image, that's a wireframe prototype. And that can be an advantageous way to do your testing because you're actually getting some feedback before you move into development. And that allows you to make changes before something's built, saving on some of the development costs. And really what separates usability testing from other research techniques is that you're seeing, again, real behaviors. You're seeing what people do. You're not just asking them what they think or what they would do in a situation. You get that real-time feedback. Do they understand the interface that they're using to navigate your website? And again, watching people do something is really the best way to understand where those usability issues are. And in some cases, the user doesn't even really articulate or can't understand what the problem is, but by observing them, you get a sense of what the issues are. So as an example, we once did a study for a large telecom company. So it was, cell phone access, cable TV, that type of thing, and their brand was very colorful. And they used their brand colors to categorize things on their website. So features related to privacy were blue, for example, or features related to parental controls were red, or features related to sort of a game or something else were yellow. And what we found is when they were listing all of these features on their website, whenever the features that were branded in yellow were at the top, the users were skipping over them. They didn't notice them. So the participants weren't able to say, I didn't notice because it was yellow. We were able to, through observations and seeing this repeated pattern, sort of conclude that, aha, the yellow color isn't standing out enough. People are missing it. So when we made a change and used a stronger color contrast in place of that yellow, then users were seeing it and able to get through that task. So just from a high level, some reasons on why you should conduct usability testing. I guess the main one, again, is to just stop guessing, right? Get insights directly from your users. It's a much better way of making those design decisions than relying on that sort of loudest voice in the room. So just to walk through the list, you can easily uncover member tasks and goals. Like, as an organization, you make assumptions about what the most important goals and things that users do on your website, but getting it in front of them, you get to understand maybe some of the nuances and confirm that you are actually designing for the right goals that your users have. You can identify content members want and what they need from it. This, I think, is also very important. One of the things that we have learned over and over again through all of those 3,000 hours of research is that, as a general rule, people don't read on the internet. They're scanning. They're looking for a headline or an image or a button. And then when they find something that catches their attention or that they're interested in, then they'll slow down and read. So it's really important to understand what that content is that they're scanning for and what's the best way to serve it to your members. Again, and then just improving the usability and usefulness of your site, making processes easier to get through. If you have a registration process, if you have a shopping cart or e-commerce process or any other type of interaction that's multi-step, it's really a great way to make sure that that's optimized and that people understand all of the steps to get through it. That relates to the next one, which is really reducing cart or site abandonment. If someone starts to get through a process and they don't understand it, they're not able to complete it, they're likely just to go somewhere else. And then improving the brand experience and overall opinion of the site is a big one. We do believe in what we call the halo effect from good design and good usability. So if your site is generally designed well and the usability is strong and it's easy to use, then people will forgive you faster if there's something down the line that's not as clear or maybe a little bit harder to do. And then decreasing development costs, again, is important, and that's again where I showed the study on the prototype, where we're trying to do this testing up front before we get too far down the path in the development, and then you can make those changes before you build the wrong thing. Improving member engagement, again, of course, a site that's easy to use and enjoyable to use, people will want to return to, and they will also spend more time on. And then again, the big one that I keep mentioning is reducing that subjectivity. You don't have to rely on your opinions and assumptions. You get real feedback from a real test about what's working and what's not. Okay, so now I'd like to get into some case studies. Most of my case studies relate to associations, but as I mentioned, we do work with other industries with B2C and B2B clients. So I do have a few examples that are more in that B2C area, but I will tie those back to an association and also to sort of an LMS use case. So the first one is the American Planning Association. They are home to the world's largest number of organizations and individuals interested in urban and regional planning. They have over 35,000 members in more than 100 countries. We were working through a site redesign with them, and so we tested on their existing site and then on the wireframes and designs for the new site. And again, we only needed 6 members. We did a one-day study and we tested on site in our usability lab here at Sandstorm. And one of the things, this is the old site before the redesign, and one of the things that members brought up and mentioned about it is it was full of stock photography, particularly in the about section and the member section. So people really notice that stuff right away. Stock photography stands out, I think, and people view it as inauthentic and inaccurate. And what members really wanted to see was they wanted to see themselves and see their peers in the site. We know this is also especially true for physicians and medical related organizations. We've heard this feedback from many physicians that they'd rather see an abstract image of something that sort of loosely relates to their specialty than posed pictures of people with stethoscopes. So we recommended, let's take some photographs at your annual meeting around your office and try to get some good photographs of your members interacting with each other. So that's what we did for the new design. The APA's membership section now features real people and locations that members can recognize and that they may have interacted with. And as an aside to this, we just worked with the American Planning Association on a sort of a community site for their members, and that we only used stock photos of their members for that site. There was 0 other photography in there. So the first key finding is really members want to see real images of their peers, especially in the about and membership sections. And I think this does also apply to an LMS and an e-learning context as well. It just helps build that emotional connection when people see real people that they know are actually within that profession. All right, I just saw a question pop through. Can I define a wireframe, please? Actually, I will. Thank you for that question. And I'm going to do one more case study. And then in the case study after that was actually a study that we did on wireframes, and I'll talk through specifically what a wireframe is and what it's for when I get to that section. So coming up. So our next case study is ACG, that's the Association for Corporate Growth. They provide global community for mergers and acquisitions and corporate growth professionals. They have 60 chapters around the world and almost 15,000 members. Again, we were working through a redesign with them, and so we did testing with their current members and then also their potential members, because attracting members and building their membership was important to them. And we did testing on their mobile version of the experience and the desktop version of the experience. So this is again the before, the old site, and as part of the design process, we did some user research, and what we learned was that the main thing that members come to this site to do is to find and learn about events. Education and networking are key things for these people, and so really finding an event and registering for an event was kind of the #1 key task on the site. And the old site didn't really facilitate that. As you can see on the left, there's just sort of a long list of events. They're all mixed together. There's no real hierarchy in terms of what's a featured event and what's sort of just, you know, meeting at the local bar for networking cocktail hour. It was just too much stuff all mixed together, and it's difficult to scan. What we learned was that members actually want to find an event, but they want to find it by a particular topic or a particular location, or maybe even by a date. So maybe they were going to take a business trip to New York in 2 weeks, and they wanted to see what events were happening there. Or they were particularly interested in a particular topic, and they wanted to look for events on that topic. So one of the things we did to them to facilitate this was we created a featured events section where we can really highlight the global events, really make those their annual events and their big higher profile events more prominent, and then give them a way to get to a list of all of the events, but also adding in some hierarchy. Again, coming back to that concept that people are really scanning rather than reading. So giving them an image to sort of catch their eye, making the title very clear and easy to understand, and then a very obvious register now button. So it's very clear how to register and get signed up for the event. The other thing that we did on their site was we enhanced the events section of their site to make it filterable. So you can't see as much here from the wireframe, but not only could you search for an event by title or keyword or look for it within a specific chapter, you could filter by date range, event type, on some of those other topics, and that really would help users find an event more specific to them. So the key finding here is don't overwhelm people with long lists of unstructured content. Give them tools for finding events or other things in long lists. And again, I think this also relates to an e-learning LMS scenario where you have lots of courses and lots of things that need to be structured, and you need to present them in a way that certain things that are more prominent have more importance, or if there's just a list of things, people have ways to search and browse that content based on what they're looking for. And this is the one where I'll talk about wireframes and define more what a wireframe is. So this next case study is NICB, the National Insurance Crime Bureau. They're a non-profit organization. They get support from nearly 1,100 property and casualty insurance companies. And really their mission is to sort of detect and help prevent and reduce insurance fraud. We did a study here in the Sandstorm Usability Lab. We tested on 8 people, generally vehicle owners or homeowners. People would have some other type of insurance, and we tested on wireframes. So here's an example of a wireframe. It's essentially a blueprint for a screen or a set of screens. So before we go into the creative design phase of a project and we start to make things look beautiful and engaging, we need to go through and make sure we have the right information on the page, that the information is structured in the right way, and that we sort of think through any of the functionality on that page. If there's filters or forms, we work through how all that works in sort of a wireframing stage, and then we work together with the creative team to design the interface. So in a nutshell, we think of it as sort of a blueprint for a website, not the final version. So one of the things that we do in usability testing as a common task is we like to confirm the labels and the language we're using for navigation. We just want to make sure we have the right terminology, and we call that sort of content expectation testing. So we want to understand that when a user looks at what we do, they can assume what would be in that section and that their assumption is correct. So we go through the site and we ask them, what would you expect to find under each one of these sections of the website? And what we learned from this study is that our label theft and fraud awareness wasn't really doing its job. People weren't sure what it meant, or they guessed maybe, but it just wasn't clear. So we needed to think of a new label so it was more clear what would be within that section of the website. And so we tried just, changing the words around, making it a little more action-based, and we changed it to prevent fraud and theft. And that's really what this section is about. It's content for identifying common insurance scams and how to report it if you need to. So this actual new label tested much better and was much more clear. So key finding number 3 is task-based navigation labels with an active verb are more effective. And as a general rule, when we structure navigation for a website, we usually try as hard as possible to start with a task-based labeling system based on what the user is trying to accomplish or why they're coming to your site. And then we go to topic-based if it seems like it makes more sense there. We do think it's okay to mix the two, to have sort of task-based and topic-based navigation. One of the things that a lot of organizations and associations try to do that is a bit tricky is they try to develop what we call an audience-based navigation. So they're trying to structure their content by the types of users or the user groups they have. There's a lot of problems with this. And really the problem with it is that the content isn't really discrete by users, and it overlaps, and a lot of times users don't even know which category they fall into. So we usually try to avoid that as a navigation structure. So I'm going to keep moving here. I'll move through these next two kind of quickly. Hopefully we'll have some time for questions. This is obviously one of the examples that's not from an association. Weber Grills, we did a test on their site as a prototype, or a beta version of their site before they launched it. I think you probably know who Weber is. We did a study here in our lab on desktop and mobile. And one of the things we were noticing on their site, while the design was very compelling, people were missing things. They were missing key content. They were missing actions. It wasn't clear what was clickable and what wasn't. So actually in this screen, for example, gas was not a link, but see all gas grills was. There's red at the top to indicate the current section you're in, but the phone number, is that a link or not? So users just weren't sure which things were clickable, and they were actually missing like key parts of the site. So really, that was one of our main feedback to them was, if you have something that's a link, let's make it stand out. Let's make sure our navigation is clearly labeled and consistent. And if something's clickable, let's make sure it's obvious that it's clickable. Now moving to my last example. This is now foods, another sort of e-commerce type experience online. So we tested with online shopping, and we tested our creative. And really, this usability finding to me is a little bit about following conventions. So searching, they have a lot of products. They have health food, essential oils, as you can see, sort of food and supplement type products, and there's a lot. There's, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 different products on their website. So searching is a key task. A lot of users, we thought the search icon was enough, but a lot of users were missing it. As you can see there, it's the magnifying glass and the label search wasn't enough. We really had to show the exposed search field so users could clearly see. And again, this comes back to that idea of people not reading, they're scanning, they're looking for that pattern, and then also following those conventions. So this key finding 5 is expose the search field when searching is a key task. So just to wrap up, you know, obviously we think testing is very important. You think of it as a way to encourage innovation and collaboration in your team, and really not relying on that sort of loudest voice in the room. Something as simple as a usability study encourages people at all levels of your organization to think differently. It allows you to use data and experience to make informed design decisions. So I know we're almost out of time, but does anyone have any quick questions? So I see there is another question here about what does one do when you have limited UX configurability, particularly with constraints with an LMS or AMS system. So I'd say one of the key things I would focus on is the labeling, right? Like, our labels clear? That seems like something you would probably have some control over. And the organization of the content. Are things in the right place? Are they in the right buckets? And then I think, you know, and we do this a lot, even when we work in a configurable CMS, you sort of eventually, as you work through a design and development process, kind of back yourself into a corner in certain areas just because of one constraint or one priority over another. So really then, you know, we just try to do the best we can, and really that is a process of just working through the options where we start with, okay, this is our best option, can we do this? No? Okay, move, you know, adjust it a little bit, how about this, until we get to something that we can do. So that involves a lot of collaboration with the development team who really understand what's possible. So we're almost out of time. So I'd like to thank everyone again for joining us. My email address is here on the screen, michael@sandstormdesign.com. I'd happy to answer any other questions as they come up. Oh, here's a few more. One question is, your testing very structured, or do you move people through tasks and see what they say? It's a little bit of both, in the sense that we have a very clear protocol where we have, you know, these are the list of things that we want people to do on their site. But if one of those key tasks is, for example, find a grill, then we will just say, okay, use the website to find a grill that you like, and then let them freely explore. So it's a little bit of both. And then last question, discuss how you manage navigation for different audience groups for associations. So again, coming back to my previous point about that being very tricky in terms of a way to structure your primary navigation. And again, the reason that's tricky is because usually content goes across your different audience bases, and usually people have a hard time very specifically identifying what audience member they are, particularly if you're saying something like, you know, a learner or a leader or an educator, like people who are in the profession but, you know, may think of themselves as one of those things. So usually what we try to do is group that content somewhere on the page and try to give the users a place to see all of the content that relates to a particular audience member, but not base our main navigation and our main structure on that. I generally try to follow a rule of, you know, a piece of content should essentially live in one place on your website. Although you can get to it from many different paths, it should really have one home in your site structure in your navigation tree.
All right, thank you so much, Michael. This was very insightful for usability. A lot of great lessons I think a lot of people learned today. I also saw a question of if we were able to share the PowerPoint presentation. Is that something we can send after the webinar?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. So for everybody still on, we'll be able to share that after the webinar. And then also, I know that we still have about a half an hour if anybody has other questions. But I can also show some of our clients and some usability tips for e-commerce to the learning management system. So I'll just take that back from you, Michael, and show some of those. And if you are able to stay on, Michael, and join us for the conversation, if any questions come up, it would be great to have your expertise on the call.
Sure. I'm sorry. I thought I was.
No, you're okay.
done it 12. No, I'm happy to
Yeah,
stay
no,
on.
you did great. Okay, so I just wanted to show just a few from our clients' perspectives of what we've heard from people using, especially we get a lot of questions when you're moving from the public e-commerce site into the learning management system. So one of the big questions we see a lot is how to name your categories of courses. And Michael, I don't know if you have any expertise on this, but a lot of times we are talking to associations about thinking about it whether you're going to name them based on topic or format. So, for example, the American Association of Nurse Anesthetists, they're kind of doing both. They've got, journal courses, which this would be by format, but then they kind of have clinical topics and leadership, which would be a topic format. So I don't know, Michael, if you want to jump in there, is there any recommendation you have for how to categorize courses?
Sure. Well, one of the research techniques I like to use to try to arrive at a user-centered approach is a card sorting exercise, which essentially, we do them online now using an online tool, but card sorting exercise comes from, literally writing down the content on index cards and having the user sort them into groups and then label those groups. So that's one way to sort of understand how your users understand the content and the way they think of it. And then my first reaction when I see something like this is I also think like, this is kind of what tagging is good for, so that you can actually label a course in multiple ways. And then maybe rather than try to use the main navigation as a way to communicate that, thinking of that events module or the events pattern that we did for ACG, where you give them more of a page where they can search and filter so they can see all the list of topics. It's more of a faceted approach, almost like an e-commerce model, where like over here, this type of pattern I think is going to help you understand all of that stuff a little better, and then combined with sort of a card sort to help get the big buckets that might help your users, use language that they use. And again, just to kind of go back to my point about how audience-based navigation can be tricky, like, am I an educator? Am I a leader? Like I could see people who are educators think of themselves as leaders. Leaders think of themselves as educators. You know what I mean? So trying to be a little bit more task or topic based might help there.
Thank you. That's helpful. Another question we get a lot is the naming convention for URLs. I don't know if that has any kind of usability relevance, but since it is like a separate e-commerce or people are buying courses, what do you recommend for any kind of naming conventions for URLs? Usually
we like to structure our URLs sort of based on where they live in the website. So it's almost like a breadcrumb trail in a way. So I would then go back to that, card sorting, labeling organization that's user tested. Or comes from user feedback. And then the other tool we use, I should mention, so we do the card sort to help get an initial structure and initial labeling, and then we could do something called tree testing, which is sort of the reverse of that, where we have just test that navigation and tweak it. So we typically structure our URLs kind of like a breadcrumb based on where they are within the site. And of course, for SEO and just for readability, trying to use a friendly URL that has words in it and not, a bunch of paths for a programmer passing values through the URL is obviously better if you can achieve that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, so the last example I have to share, this is a more recent kind of client experience in our e-commerce system. So again, this is their public-facing site where people can purchase courses, and then once they purchase the courses, then they'll be within the learning management system. So this layout is a bit unique. It's kind of a new design that we've done where they wanted it so that when you land on the e-commerce, you just see the title. but then once you hover, you see the description. And there was a big discussion around what's the best way to approach this? How much information do you want in the description? I don't know if again, that's a usability question, but I know that it was kind of a big conversation around what kind of information do you want to give away on a landing page like this compared to in the actual product pages.
Sure, yeah, so I would say this would be a great candidate for usability testing, right? To get that direct feedback from the users of the site. I think that just from a high level, my initial reaction to this is that it seems like it mostly works. Like I don't see anything here that seems particularly hard to understand. I would be curious to test. So when you click on a title, the only thing it does is shows that pop-up. Is that true?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well,
so
if I click on it, it goes to the product page.
Okay. So then my thought there would be, you know, I don't think that's optimized for touch screens. Mm-hmm. Right. So if you're not using a mouse, you're gonna miss that that overlay, that pop-up.
Got it.
Or mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So that's where I would, and then I would also wonder on mobile how that works. But I think I mean, that could just be solved by, you know, the title goes to the page, and below that you had a, you know, learn more link that opened and closed the overlay. So yeah, I would say this would be a great candidate for usability testing, because then you could really see, do users really, do they interact with that? Are they getting what they need? Are they happy just to go straight to a page for each event and learn that information there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. And I think I saw another question from Mona. So yes, in these examples, a lot of stock photos are being used. Would you recommend removing them, and what would you replace them with? I'll let Michael answer that, but yeah, these are our clients, and I don't know that they did usability testing.
Sure. Yeah, so I think as a general rule, even if you're not using images of your members in your membership, like if you have the budget, custom photography is always recommended. Just to then it's more on brand, it's more unique to your site. Someone is not going to see the same image on your site that they see on a billboard or on another organization's advertising. So it looks like that main image there might be a actual photo of actual members. They may not realize they have a Coke can in there. So that looks to me more authentic. If that's stock photography, I'm not seeing that. And then I think you also, you know, you just have to balance with your budget and your goals. If you're trying to show membership, I would really strongly encourage you to show actual members. If you have to resort to stock photography for things like, you know, an image for a particular course, I would just say try to look for things that seem like they go together, so that it feels like the imagery on the whole site is all from the same set of images, and do the best you can. But if you have the budget and you have the time, you know, custom photography goes a long ways to really build impact on your design.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And then Mona kind of followed up and asked if you wouldn't just want titles and buttons, right? You'd still want a picture if all you can do right now is stock photos, right?
Yeah, I think the images help. They help with that scannability, and again help. You know, back to that concept of people aren't really reading. They're reading, but they wait until they find something that they're interested in, so they'll scan. So the image helps with that. It helps visually sort of separate all the words on a page, and it helps with that scanning behavior. So yeah, I'd say, you know, stock photography over no photography, if that's what you'd have to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. if anybody else has any questions, we'll stay on for about 5 more minutes. You can feel free to enter in your questions in the questions pane. But thank you guys so much. And again, we'll stay on for about 5 more minutes and see if any questions come through. But this was really interesting, Michael. We really appreciate you joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. And then did you post or put up your, we have your contact information if anybody has any questions or wants to reach out to Sandstorm Design for any help with usability?
Yes, please. Yeah, it's michael@sandstormdesign.com. It was in my last slide, so if we send out the slide deck, it'll be in there as well.
Perfect.
Or you can just go to sandstormdesign.com and reach us through our contact us page.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, I don't see any other questions that came through, so thank you guys for joining us today. We will end the webinar. There will be a brief survey after if you're available to take that quick survey to give us some feedback. We really appreciate your feedback. But otherwise, thank you so much for joining us, and we will hope to see you on our next webinar. Thank you.